speaking of the cottage, and of course, there's a lot that I could say about the cottage, but this video is, at least in theory, focusing primarily on the differences between the book and the TV series. One of the things that stood out really, immediately when it happened was a conversation that took place between Shane and Ilya at the cottage in Shane's like hockey practice arena that he built as part of the cottage. So the two of them are there, they're passing the puck, they're kind of playing around, and Ilya just kind of casually drops that he ended up going to a gay bar with Scott and Kip that were holding a night in his honor. And of course, that's something that's missing from the TV show. But I think it's really interesting that that was included here in the book, and I think it's interesting that it is actually missing from the TV show, right? So in the book, Shane is a bit miffed and a bit nervous that Ilya went and did this. But of course, I think it also says something that we see in the TV show, but here really solidifies this difference between the two of them that will manifest and becomes a lot clearer in the sequel to Heated Rivalry in the long game, which is that Ilya is much more open and much more comfortable, not only I would say with his sexuality, but also with the idea of coming out and being more public. He's more open to taking, risks with being seen, and he seems to care a lot less, especially now that his feelings for Shane are known and that they've been reciprocated by Shane. Interestingly enough, this scene builds on an earlier scene that was also missing from the TV show. It's the scene where Ilya Skypes Shane, and Ilya discovers that he now has like a fetish for Shane wearing glasses, or like just like a glasses fetish, as a whole. And in the book, in fact, we actually discover that Shane has actually slept with other men, which is not something that is disclosed in the TV show, right? So in the book, Shane mentions that on a guy's trip down to Mexico, he ended up hooking up with another kind of Dom top, and that at one time when he was in Los Angeles, he ended up going out on his own out of desperation and picked up a guy where they exchanged more than just numbers, we can say. So that's missing from the TV show, and I think again it just serves to sort of emphasize the difference between the two of them. That Shane is a lot less open about and a lot less comfortable with. But what we see here in the book is that he has actually taken some risks, which is something that we don't get in the TV show. So I think that was a very interesting change that again serves to emphasize the differences between these two characters. But it's funny because in this instance, it actually creates just a bit of a connection, and of course, it allows Ilya to sort of playfully jab Shane about his previous choices. More interesting for me, though, is the fact that Rachel Reed in the book decided that Shane, first of all, needed to go to a completely different country to have a hookup. First of all, because that was his first hookup. Second of all, that he basically tried to find a different version of Ilya. But third of all, I think it's interesting, and again, I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but for me at least, it creates a connection between Heated Rivalry and Brokeback Mountain. Because for those of you who have seen Brokeback Mountain, and I will be talking about Brokeback Mountain actually in the second video, or the third overall, but the second in the series of videos that I'm talking about minus the introduction. The character played by Jake Gyllenhaal, Jack Twist, there's a scene later on in the movie where he makes his way down to Mexico and picks up a Mexican guy for sexual as a sexual encounter. So again, I don't know if that was purposeful, but I can't help but see that as a connective thread. And I think it's very interesting that again, out of all of the places, Rachel Reed decided that Shane was going to go to not just any other country, but Mexico, and that he was going to choose to hook up with someone there, which on a textual level makes sense that he had to like leave the country for safety. But then it also shows that because he took that risk, again, on a more literary level, he felt the he felt okay enough to actually take the risk to go out and find someone, within the United States of America, which is still a different country than Canada, but nonetheless is a bit more of a risk just because of the relationship between Canada and the US, especially when it comes to hockey. I'll talk a lot more about this in a upcoming video where I talk about the way in which different audiences have received the show, some of the important representation that preceded the show that managed to like push itself into the mainstream the way that this show has. So again, Brokeback Mountain, as well as Queer as Folk and a few other movies and TV shows. But here, I think it's really interesting that in the book, what we get that isn't necessarily the case in the TV show, particularly with Shane, is that the closet door isn't as sealed shut as it seems, right? The fact that Ilya went out in public with other gay hockey players, not just gay people, but gay hockey players to a gay space and just didn't care. The fact that Shane, took some risks of being discovered and, publicly, went out and hooked up with people. I think in the book we're seeing that that closet door again isn't fully sealed shut, which is an interesting difference than what we get, I would say, in the TV show. So in Heated Rivalry, the book, there is a scene that takes place between Ilya and Ryan Price on an airplane where Ilya essentially calms or talks Ryan Price off of an emotional ledge because it turns out that Ryan Price is a bad flyer. He's very nervous, and on the airplane, they were going through a bit of turbulence. So, as I said before, I've only read Heated Rivalry and The Long Game. So, I haven't read the third book in the series, Tough Guy. And so, my understanding is that Rachel Reed has the tendency to introduce the main characters of the following book in the current book that is being read. So, this is, I guess, her introducing the main character of, Tough Guy, the third book in the Game Changer series. That scene is missing, and again, it doesn't really matter. It's not all that important to the development of Ilya or Shane. I think this is a scene that again is really just related more to the books and about Rachel introducing the next character and setting up the narrative that will come out about him being this gentle giant that's actually very nervous, very sensitive, that plays type against his burly demeanor, and thus the title of the third book, Tough Guy, right? But it isn't. I would say also, perhaps I don't want to say strategically, but it also makes sense that this scene wouldn't be there because they did not know if the show was going to be continued after the first season, right? So introducing new characters that may appear in seasons 2 and 3 just wouldn't really be needed, right? But and here, mini spoiler alert. So if you haven't read The Long Game, stop listening now for a second. But as you may know, Ryan Price is not only the main character in the third book, but he actually does come up as a character and a relatively important one in The Long Game as well. So I'm curious to see if this sequence or if this scene as a flashback or in some sort of way is going to make its way into season 2 of the TV series. But again, in terms of a change, it was just something that kind of surprised me in terms of it like being an entire sequence that just wasn't there. But probably something that could very easily be omitted for a number of reasons. So thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope you found the differences that I discussed here and the analysis that I provided, especially some of the more abstract analysis that I provided. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope you found it informative and helpful. Again, feel free to like and subscribe if you liked what you've seen and heard here. And please do feel free to comment. I do want to hear from you. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there anything that I missed? Anyone that comments, I will comment back, and I would love to hear more from all of you and your thoughts on everything that I said or that I didn't say.